All right, thank you so much. Our partner broadcast network, NBS, there. And still on matters, Uganda, which is now in the midst of a nation-scale internet blackout. The blackout did come a day after the government ordered a block on all social media and messaging apps in the run-up to today's election. President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni said this was because Facebook had banned several accounts which backed his ruling party. Popster turned opposition presidential candidate Bobi Wine has tweeted that the internet shutdown is part of a plot to rig the elections. So what does this impact have to the decision and the credibility of elections? We want to speak to Donald Deya, who chairs the Center for Citizens Participation in the African Union and has played a crucial role in the region as an election observer. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much for joining us on Bottomline Africa.
Sorry, good afternoon, and thank you for having me on your show. Great.
Let's start from where I just read that intro, sir, on the credibility of these elections. We have seen internet shutdown across Uganda, and even as we speak, the politician Bobi Wine did allege of mass poll irregularities and harassment. What do you think about all this? Will these elections be credible enough?
I think it is difficult to call this an election anymore, especially at the presidential level. What we have witnessed and we're witnessing is a massive nationwide military operation, not an election. So it is definitely neither free nor fair. And what remains is what will the people of Uganda and the people of the region and our regional institutions do about it?
I know we know what you're talking about, but I want to hear it from you because you've called it a military operation. Just expound on that.
We've seen lots of things. We've seen that there's no freedom of information or expression. Internet and the social media have been blocked worldwide, countrywide. Even mobile money has been blocked. And all of this is by a formal letter from the communications regulator, the Uganda Communications Commission.
All right, we appear to have a slight challenge there with Mr. Donald Deya, a regional election observer who is currently in Tanzania. He works with the Human Rights Watch, and basically we're just talking matters Uganda elections, which are taking place today, the parliamentary and presidential elections. He was just talking to us about the credibility of this election, which to him, he says we cannot even call it an election. He has said it is a military operation because of what we've seen. Over time, we've seen the campaigns mad with violence. We've seen a lot of people, especially from Bobi Wine's camp, being arrested. He did say that even his guard, his personal guard, was actually shot dead. A lot of people have been shot dead in all this violence that has come from the campaigns. But of course, we'll be striving to have, or we'll have that conversation with Mr. Donald Deya shortly in this broadcast. But let's now take you to South Africa. And as cases of COVID-19 surge daily, surpassing levels seen in the first wave of the pandemic, South African restaurant workers continue to feel the brunt of tight lockdown regulations imposed by government to slow the spread of the virus. Soraya Ali reports.
South Africa's hospitality workers must continue to clear tables, close doors and lock up restaurants by 9 p.m. in accordance with tighter lockdown restrictions imposed by the government to slow the spread of the virus.
We have recorded nearly 190.
President Cyril Ramaphosa has said that level 3 restrictions would be extended for the safety of the country.
More than 4,000.
Restaurant owners and associations across the country have been pleading for leniency since the start of the outbreak. The sector continues to suffer from permanent closures and loss of livelihoods. Hannah Moyo is a restaurant manager.
We still have hope things are going to change, although it all depends on how people handle themselves and how people are taking this whole COVID thing. Because the reason why we have a hard lockdown is because of the numbers that are surging every day. So that will mean people will lose jobs either, everyone, including me. Yeah, that will be sad news.
South Africa is the continent's worst affected country. It's seen a rise in cases driven by a new virus variant that is believed to be more contagious. President Ramaphosa said earlier this week that the country had secured 20 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines, which would be delivered mainly in the first half of the year.
Right, and we have here back Mr. Donald Deya, the regional election observer. He's joining us live from Dodoma in Tanzania. He also works with Human Rights Watch. Sir, welcome on board once again. And I want us to take it from where we left it. You are calling this election a military operation.
Yes, that's what I did. And actually, although I partner with Human Rights Watch, I don't work for them. I head the Pan-African Lawyers Union, whose secretariat is in Arusha in Tanzania. So I was saying that what we've seen is massive violence and intimidation. We've seen partisan and violent policing. The military and specialized units of the military have been deployed across the country, carrying out patrols, intimidating people, abducting people, actually killing people. The head of state himself has confirmed that a boxer known as Zebra, who was associated with Bobby Wine, was abducted by soldiers in the middle of the night and shot dead shortly outside his house. So throughout the electoral period, that's what we've been seeing: unlawful and excessive use of force, arbitrary arrests, prolonged detentions, filing of fake charges in courts. And even when the courts release people on bail, the prisons and the military have conspired in handing over such people who have been released on bail to the military, who then detain them in barracks and subject them to court martials, even though they are civilians. Journalists have been clobbered and have been told by the Inspector General of Police that they're being beaten for their own security, and so on. So really, we've got the military that has captured a country and is doing what it wants with it. That's what's going on in Uganda.
You're right, especially on that beat concerning the journalists, because they're only doing their work. We're only doing our work there. So we'll come back to the violence, but I want us to talk more about election observers, and especially because you are one, and the kind of treatment they have had, because we did see actually yesterday or the day before yesterday, the U.S. casting doubt over the electoral process and withdrawing their election observers after most of their accreditation requests were denied. But before you respond to that, I want to read something here, a response that we got from Mr. Museveni's spokesman, that is the president's spokesman, Don Wanyama, who tweeted that there were observers from the African Union and East African Community. And he says, "I don't remember when Uganda last sent election observers to the U.S."
Well, I don't know what value it adds to say that. One thing I can say, as far as I know, there are no observers from the African Union. There is an election observation mission from the East African Community, the EAC, and another one from the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD. So those are on the ground, yes. But the problem is not just foreign observers. Even local observers have been completely constrained. A small percentage of those that have observed elections in the past have been allowed accredited this year. So several local CSOs were also not accredited. We also saw in the run-up to the elections, the attacks on the CSOs, bank accounts being frozen, people being charged with terrorism or financial crimes which are not true, when it is very clear what they got their money from and what they're doing with it. In terms of voting day to day, we're receiving reports of parting agents being rejected at polling stations and others being intimidated, such as in Tungamo and Jinja and so on. So for me, the credibility of this election on all these grounds, how the media has been treated, how local observers have been treated, how foreign observers have been treated, how the Electoral Commission is carrying out its tasks, leaves a lot to be desired.
So now, what will be the outcome of all this to Uganda as a republic, to the people of Uganda? Let's look at it this way. What happens if at the end of the day or tomorrow they declare Yoweri Kaguta Museveni as the president again? What will happen in your view?
I mean, it's a foregone conclusion that they're going to declare him. And I would say, I mean, the sooner they declare him, the better. Maybe then they'll stop killing and beating people. Then the people of Uganda and the people of the region have to have a long, hard conversation on how we build and sustain democratic institutions, and keep people accountable. Because as we've learned in the case of Kenya, my own home country, that a constitution is one thing, constitutionalism is another, because you can have leaders who will violate even their own constitution and very clear provisions of their laws. So I think it's a long, difficult time for the people of East Africa and the people of Africa, and we just have to roll up our sleeves and see how we create genuine transformation and how we can engage the regional bodies, the EAC, IGAD, the AU, to be able to be platforms on which we can have genuine talks around democracy. Because looking at what is going on in Uganda now, my greatest fear is not just what's happening to the people of Uganda, but the growing risk of contagion in the Great Lakes and Horn of Africa region. That if Museveni and his thugs, military thugs, get away with it, it will be very alluring, and many more leaders will be thinking of doing the same. So even though the AU talks of silencing the guns, at this rate, there will be no silencing of the guns in our continent, and especially in our region, the Great Lakes and the Horn of Africa.
And it's like you just read my mind, because I wanted to ask, is this an African problem? From the days of Muammar Gaddafi, Robert Mugabe, and now Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, who's been in power since 1986. I mean, I was actually sharing this with my colleagues here in studio, that when Museveni became president, Bobi Wine, Robert Chagulanyi, was perhaps 3 years old. The man is half his age. Is this an African problem? And I know you mentioned it, but what is it likely to do to other African leaders? I know you mentioned that, but just talk to us about it.
I mean, it is not a uniquely African problem. All across the world, in all the continents, we are finding best practices on democracy. We're also finding very bad practices on democracy. I mean, the world is still reeling from what we've seen from the white supremacists that formed the bedrock of the Republican Party in the United States, who literally attempted a coup, an insurrection, last week on Thursday. We have other authoritarian regimes, China, Turkey, and so on in the Middle East and so on. So it's not only Africa. But what my pitch is Africa, which has been a great leader of the world over the last thousands of years in which the world existed, is being called upon to rise up again and lead by setting the model. A friend of mine, Chidi Ansem Odinkalu, did like some straw poll and realized that in the 14 countries that made up East Africa, the Horn of Africa, and the Great Lakes region, only 3 are not led by a military leader. It's only Tanzania, Kenya, and DRC. All the rest, it's military folk, Ethiopia, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and so on. And these people are people who you can see their tendency is to prefer military strong-arm solutions to what should be, civilian, political, action and negotiations. So it's a big, big challenge for us in the region. We have very good principles, values, laws, and so on written into the treaties of the African Union, written into the East African Community Treaty, written into the pact and the protocols of the International Conference of the Great Lakes region. So our leaders have themselves signed up on all the right things. The question is, how do we make these things work for the benefit of the ordinary girl or boy, woman, man, in a rural or urban setting?
All right, I'm being told we need to wrap up, but I need to give you a minute because I want to ask, what, in your view, would it take to have a different Uganda, a new Uganda? I know there are supporters of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, and there are supporters of Bobi Wine and the other 9 contenders for this presidential seat. But what, in your view, would it take to have someone who's young, and I hope I'm not sounding partisan, but someone who's young lead this nation?
Well, as I said, we will accept, but we do not recognize that Museveni is the legitimate leader of Uganda. So that's the question. So for me, at the moment, as a Pan-African Lawyers Union, we are calling upon the EAC, IGAD, and the AU to not recognize the declared presidential election result, to suspend Uganda from the AU in terms of the provisions of the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance, to then convene talks with all stakeholders, political and non-political, in Uganda around restoring democratic governance to Uganda, and specifically calling upon the African Commission on Human and People's Rights to undertake an urgent mission into Uganda and look at the human and people's rights violations that have happened over the last 3 months. And this can be preceded by virtual consultations between the Commission and stakeholders. And I'm especially calling on the AU, EAC, and IGA to discuss especially what should be the role of the military in civilian policing and what constraints and accountability should be there. So for me, that's what I'm calling for.
All right. I know that was supposed to be my last question, but Xavier, please allow me, if that happens, the recommendations you just gave, what you're calling upon them to do, what would be the consequences, especially if, and in your own words, you say it looks like it has already been decided, if Museveni becomes president again, what would the consequences be like? And do you even think he would allow it as president?
Well, I think African people are resilient. We've seen that across many African countries. We've seen that in Cameroon, Guinea, Niger, Mali, even in our own region. People are surviving despite the massive violations and monstrosities being done upon them. So I think he will have his way. He'll get his term. And it's then just to give the people of Uganda the time to recover from the trauma